So good afternoon, everyone. I hope you have had the opportunity to enjoy some of that beautiful sunshine today. And I know we're all looking forward to a beautiful weekend. So I super appreciate you being here on a Friday afternoon. And remember that I will record this if you need to head out early, or if you only have a few minutes to stay, you will be able to get all of the content for the meeting and it will be sent out next week. So we do have plenty to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our land acknowledgement. We would like to open this convening by recognizing that we are in the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We cannot work to fulfill our mission and our vision of an anti-racist present if we don't first acknowledge and recognize the true history and the cost of colonization. However, acknowledgement is only a first step, and we urge you to engage in accountable relationships and informed actions. Just a couple of quick announcements. As a network, we look to uplift all the voices and activities that further our shared priority to increase Black homeownership. So please be sure to send me updates and info for our weekly digests that are for the good of the whole. And also, please be sure to sign up for the digest yourself if you haven't. Encourage others to do so as well. Everyone is welcome. We want to continue to grow the network and our impact. And it's going to take all of us doing that together to reach our shared goal. Today we have a pretty packed agenda, and I really enjoyed doing our opener last week, but there have been so many things happening within the policy reality, and we want to make sure that we are keeping you informed. So today we're not going to have an opener. We're going to just move into our agenda so that we can have all of our speakers honored. Today we will be hearing from Sasha Gourevitch, the Performance and Strategy Analyst at the King County Office of Performance Strategy and Budget. They wrote the King County Reparative Action Study report that we're going to be hearing about today. Next, we'll hear from Erika Malone, the Homeownership Division Manager at the Seattle Office of Housing, about the Seattle Housing Levy Implementation Plan. We were all very much involved in the passage of the levy, and it's great to understand where we are. As we all understand, policy as written versus implementation are very different things, and we always want to be tracking along the entirety of the policy process. Following Erika will be Jesse Simpson, our Director of Government Relations and Policy at HDC. He will be giving us an update on the Seattle Jumpstart spend plan. I know you were all very much involved with the recent EDI work, and there is a big connective tissue between EDI and the Jumpstart spend plan. And finally, we will hear from Jesse Johnson, the Outreach and Community Engagement Director at the Washington State Treasurer's Office, about a relaunch of the Washington Future Fund campaign, a really exciting event they'll be having in August that I hope to see you there at, and of course the continuance of that important work. If time allows, we'll have some minutes at the end of the meeting for news from you. So if you do have something to share that would be good for everyone to hear, please be prepared to do so during that open floor time. And at 2 o'clock, we'll be ready to head out into the sunshine. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that we can do that, and you can all get out to where you need to be to do all of the amazing things that I'm sure you have planned for this weekend, whether it is just to sit in the sun and see how long it takes you to feel faint. Like I'm up for that. I'm totally up for that. And I see Sasha in the room, and I'm going to quickly make you a co-host, Sasha, so that you have no problem with starting your slideshow there. And then before I have you speak, so that I don't have those silly little things come up, I'm going to go ahead and have Jesse as co-host. Sorry about that, not host, but co-host, so that he will be ready to go. And then Jesse Johnson will be joining us later. So Sasha, feel free to take it away.
Great, thanks. And just bear with me because I actually am not sure if I've shared my screen on Zoom before. So just let me know if this is working.
You got it. We'll let you know if we see it. I am seeing it, and it's in full presentation mode.
Okay, great. So hi, thanks for having me. I'm Sasha Gourevitch. I'm the Performance and Strategy Analyst at the Performance and Strategy team in the Office of Performance Strategy and Budget for King County in the Executives Department. I want to preface this by saying I'm not an expert in housing or some of the findings we found here. I was the project manager. But happy to answer any questions about what we found and what's next. You all probably have really great ideas about what we can do here, but just wanted to sort of preface that up first. So just to give a background of why, what I submitted and where we are. So back in April, King County's wastewater treatment division transmitted a report around the application of a wastewater capacity charge to King County residents who were impacted or were descendants of families or people who were impacted by racial restrictive covenants or racist real estate practices. Essentially, that report, there's a big report. I'm happy to share that if you don't have that already by reparative actions. There's a specific calculation of how that's charged and how you can give discounts or not. So essentially from there, council and retiring council member Colwell saw that report. There was a lot of really good information in there and some examples of what other jurisdictions have considered in terms of reparative actions. So essentially there was a motion passed, sponsored by council member Colwell's, asking the executive to look further into what options could be there. To note, this was an unfunded motion, so there was no budget in terms of hiring consultants or doing research. And since the this
Hey, Sasha.
Sort of a legacy.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Sasha, I don't know if others experienced it, but your audio kind of glitched out a little bit. So if you could repeat that sentence or so, that would be great. Well, this will be the first for me if Sasha has some issues with audio. Always time for a first. There we go. And Sasha, if it helps, sometimes it's best to turn off your video if you feel like there might be competition for the video and the audio for you.
Yes, let me try that. Okay. Well, great. Let's keep going. Is it working? Still working? Okay, yeah, we'll see.
There was just a few moments there where it kind of broke up. So
okay, sorry about that. So just two things to note on this slide. It was an unfunded motion, so no budget in terms of our response or doing some deep research. And then, the council member was retiring, so this could be considered a legacy or a sort of a parting gift for the council member as she was leaving. This was really her ask and one of her asks as she was leaving. So just two things to note about the background of this motion. What the motion itself asked us to do, the executive, was to provide an overview of programs or reparative actions that were considered or implemented by other jurisdictions, which was the first thing. Two was to look at general fund budget reduction proposals in our 2025 annual budget that would minimize ongoing harm. And decrease, you can see here, make sure we're not doing anything that would increase this gap or decrease homeownership rates, et cetera. And then the third piece was looking at what are some reparative actions that we could add to our legislative agenda, either on the state level or the federal level. We should also sort of note that the response was not tailored to what would work for King County. So the letter is saying, here are examples of what other jurisdictions have considered. There was no specific analysis in our letter around what would work for King County, what are King County community members asking for, what have we tried, no sort of analysis or look at what our state constitution allows in these specific programs. So it was really sort of a matrix of what exists. A couple reasons for that is the county has limited staffing and capacity to do that deep analysis. As I mentioned, there was no funds attached to that motion. We don't have a lot of data on the reparative actions that other jurisdictions have implemented. A lot of them were born around 2020, and a lot of them are just getting off the ground right now. So we don't have a full analysis or data on which programs have been most impactful and what has moved the needle. And then related to the first point, the county currently has limited funding to implement programs, even if we were able to do this deeper analysis to say this is what would work in King County, and here's what has been asked for us. We don't have funds at this time to implement that type of program. And then lastly, based on some research in that initial report, King County itself as an entity had limited responsibility in some of these practices. King County certainly upheld the culture and some of those practices, but the research we found was a lot of it was more based on the state ordinances or zoning, the private industry or mortgage financial institution. So limited role specifically from King County. And then the last thing to note is you can see here, this actually does ask for other sort of reparative actions like startup capital or job training. The direction I was given was to keep it very closely tied to home ownership. So the reparative actions in our letter are most tied to housing specifically. We did not look at job training programs or startup capital programs. It was very most tied, as close tied to the harm of housing as we could. Let's see. So some examples that we found. There's a couple slides I'll go through here and just talk about some of them individually. So the first one is down payment and home improvement assistance examples. We saw a lot of those examples. Here are some cities that are implementing these programs. One example we found is in St. Paul. They have the St. Paul Recovery Act Communication Reparations Commission in 2023. And one of the pieces of their work was to include what's called the Rondo Inheritance Fund. The Rondo neighborhood was upended during the construction of a freeway there and displaced around 600 families. St. Paul already has a program for housing down payment support and home improvement assistance. What this does is adds additional funding to those that are eligible for the Rondo Fund. So those that were living in those neighborhoods or descendants of those that were living in those neighborhoods and already met criteria for the existing down payment assistance fund or homeowner rehab fund were able to receive additional funding on top of that program. So a lot of these programs are structured that way. The eligibility, I'll say for everything I'm about to talk about, is a little bit different based on that community and that neighborhood and the impacts and the harm that was caused to the families and the descendants. So that's one example. We have a table of that in the letter. The second is around education and resources in Las Vegas. They have, it's called the Las Vegas Coalition to Make Homes Possible. It was launched in 2021. This is a partnership with the city, Nevada Housing Division, the Chamber of Commerce, and Homey, which is a tech-based real estate company. And they have a goal of connecting Black households to homeownership. They provide resources, information, connection to down payment support, financial literacy, and other resources in the home buying process. So there's sort of a network of support and different options for households in Las Vegas. We also saw a lot of restorative justice examples. One example in Asheville, North Carolina, they passed a resolution in 2020, formally apologizing for their participation and the sanctioning of the enslavement of Black people, their enforcement of segregation, and their accompanying discriminatory practices, and their continued role in carrying out other urban renewal programs and policies that destroyed multiple successful Black neighborhoods, communities, and businesses. Asheville's community, they they launched a reparations commission that conducted an audit to understand how the local government and policies and practices are causing harm to the Black community in Asheville and the ongoing harm. And this audit resulted in 108 recommendations that I believe Asheville, their commission is still working through. I would say for the most part, those on the list, from what I can remember, the restorative justice, a lot of them passed these resolutions formally apologizing for their role, but it didn't end there. That was sort of the first step of saying, we're acknowledging our role and here's what we're going to do. A lot of them, I would say actually all of them, did engage in a community engagement process, had a commission, like I just mentioned, and did a full audit. And again, that's not something that we put in the letter to say for King County and for our region, we would need to do a deeper process like that or work with groups who have already done this work ahead of time. It didn't feel appropriate for me or for our office to submit a letter with all of these recommendations without doing that work. So just wanted to note that most of these cities and counties, or sorry, if not all of them, engaged in a deeper process to come up with recommendations. And then the last one, which is not directly tied to home ownership, but an example about housing. Santa Monica has already has a pilot around below market housing. What they did is they created a pilot in 2021 and to how they prioritize who's eligible or who's on the wait list. And they added a new category. So the first category or priority is Santa Monica households who've been impacted or displaced by a natural disaster. The second priority, which was the newly adopted priority, are households or descendants of households that were displaced from the historic Belmore neighborhood, where the Civic Center is around the I-10 freeway. And then the third priority is part of their current strategy, which is households who live or work at least 25 hours per week in Santa Monica. So again, they added this priority for families and descendants who have been impacted by urban policy or different policies that the city implemented. And then lastly, we added this list to which we, to put on the legislative agenda. A number of them have to do with funding. I've mentioned this multiple times already, that the county doesn't have enough funding right now to both do a big study or community engagement process and implement a lot of these programs if we were going to do one. So a lot of these are not new to the legislative agenda, but you can see things here like remove the 1% cap on the property tax revenue. That's something the county's already been interested in. There's some ideas here around the expansion of, property tax exemption for which already exists for seniors or those with disabilities. We could expand that to include those that were harmed by racist real estate practices. I'm sure you're all aware of the gift of public fund prohibition. We would need to amend that as well. And then there's other ideas like around expanding the home individual development account to help folks pay for home repairs or mortgage assistance. So that's sort of where the letter that was submitted. It was due June 1st, and I actually think it was maybe a little bit delayed. So I think it's in its process right now. And I've seen some of the emails going through submission to council. So at this stage, the ball is in the council's court. We are waiting to hear what next steps we will hear from them, if any. That should be part of public record when it's officially signed into their record and approved. And I know we're just at time, so I wanted to see if there's any questions. I'll also put into the chat my email and everything in case folks want to follow up.
Ryan, you had a question?
Yeah, going back to the legislative agenda slide, you had mentioned on there about the gift of public funds being a barrier, like that component being a barrier. I guess I would push back on that a little bit, since we already see programs at the city, county, and state level that work to create things like homeownership assistance programs using public funds and being able to do that. So I'm not sure I would agree with that being a barrier. I mean, I don't know if there's a space to be able to kind of look at that, but I think, I mean, I get your point there, but I think that's kind of settled, I guess, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. Yeah, it can be a barrier in other areas for other programs. Not to say that this list isn't necessarily to say we can't do any programs because this exists. These are a list of things that we would want to ensure, you know, we are creating, if and when we can create a program, we're taking all of that into consideration, and that might be something we would need to remove or work through if needed, depending on what the program looks like. So this wasn't a list to say we can't do anything because of these reasons. This is more of a list of, we got to double check, we got to make sure that this works, and how we interpret that.
Got it. Thank you.
But thank you. Yeah, good point.
And Talana?
Thank you for the presentation. I don't even know how to really ask this, but you know, something that I've listened to a couple times during presentations is what organizations and agencies, what types of services they're offering families who might potentially benefit from this. A lot of it I hear about literacy, financial literacy, things like that. This is an assumption that Black people are not financially literate, and that's not the issue. The issue is not having access to enough of it. So not necessarily, we're not illiterate, and so we're not, you know, when it comes to that. And I think that you know, the true barriers are the things like what we don't have access to, fair credit reporting, things like that. How has that come into any of these conversations with legislative priorities?
It hasn't exactly. I think the only, to that your point, the only in my research, the only program I saw that really focused on financial literacy as one component was the education and resources example in Las Vegas. And certainly it was not a requirement that folks need to go through this program to have access to capital. But yes, that is what we saw. And I 100% agree with you. The issue is not, you know, money management and financial literacy. It's getting in the door, access to fair mortgage rates, access to capital in the first place. You know, thinking about the historical generational wealth, who has the funds in the first place, loan rates, all of those sorts of things. So, you know, again, as part of anything that King County would not do without hearing from community directly as part of what those recommendations would be specifically for the communities here.
And I thank you for that. And I strongly encourage focus groups with Black people, with people who will hopefully benefit from this, and it just not turn into a bunch of buzzwords. But you know, I more than just talk about it. I would like to be a part of that, because there are true barriers, and it's not being able to access no matter what you do, no matter how much money we make, we can't get those loans, and we can't get our credit scores up high enough to qualify for things.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I should be really clear, and you know, apologies, it wasn't the beginning. I started some of the reasons why I'm saying unfunded and this motion, you know, kind of giving the history of the motion, is because when I was first assigned this task, I ideally thought I would have funds and time to do work with community, that it wasn't going to be a letter, a recommendation from Sasha or from Performance and Strategy Budget Office to Council. And knowing that this work has already been done, you all are the experts, you already have the recommendations, we don't need to go and you know, convene and start from scratch. Once we learned a little bit more about the history of this specific motion and how it came to be, was told it's going to be a little bit different than you originally thought. So this was sort of more here's what exists, the landscape that exists across the country, and tried to be really clear with council to say, you know, this is not a menu that you're just going to like pick up and plop and put here, that here's what exists. And if you want to do something, it should be funded. It needs to be intentional, and it needs to come from community, not from Sasha or PSB. So at this point, we're sort of we'll see what comes from council after this, hopefully with some funds and time and resources.
And Sasha, you were saying the report is being transmitted at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you have an expected date for council hearing yet?
I don't yet. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll definitely stay in contact and make sure that we can provide opportunities. The important thing I think you have said a number of times is that in order for this to be anything more than a bit of a closure at the end of last year as someone was moving on, is to find a champion who's willing to take it up and figure out what it is that they're willing to take up. And so we will definitely be using the digest to keep you all informed about the possibility of when this comes to council hearing and what maybe some good strategies moving forward would be. And then unfortunately, Kathleen, I do see your hand, but in the interest of time, if you know, you very quick.
Yeah, the risk of being a broken record, the biggest thing that the county can do is fund the development of income appropriately priced homes. And the current funding streams that are available are designed for rental housing. They are not designed for home ownership. That is block and tackle, the very first thing that this council should be taking up. How can they provide more funding so we can scale for production to meet the scale of the need? Thanks.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Well, there is definitely more to come in this scenario. Thank you so much for your time, Sasha, and for joining us. Please feel free to stay in the room. Next, we're going to hear from Erika Malone at Seattle Office of Housing. We want to hear about the Seattle Housing Levy implementation plan. So go ahead and get that started for yourself there, Erika. Let me know if you need anything.
I think I'm good-ish. What are folks seeing here?
Yeah, we're seeing you in full screen.
All right. Hello, everyone. Erika Malone, City of Seattle, Office of Housing. I know we are not all Seattle-based, hoping that this is relevant to the whole group. Here to talk about the policy documents that govern both the levy and our other investments in housing and home ownership. Quick refresher, y'all helped us voters pass to the tune, I think, of 67% voter approval of the housing levy this last fall, $970 million over the next 7 years. Highlighted here, this home ownership line item. $51 million, a huge increase from the 9.5 in the last levy. Yay. Those funds are for 4 different programs. The funding of development of resale restricted permanently affordable home ownership, investment of down payment or purchase assistance funding for individual households to buy homes off the open market, home repair grants for existing low-income homeowners, and foreclosure prevention loans to help low-income homeowners stay in their homes. Quickly, just to put a fine point on it, there are the 2 policy documents, the administrative and financial plan, and honestly, I'd been in my job maybe 5 years before I understood the distinction between these 2 documents. Is levy specific, really detailed on what OH is supposed to report to council and to the public and how we monitor the spending. And the housing funding policies broadly govern how we make all of our investments. So not just the levy, but these other funding sources as well. The payroll expense tax, also known as Jumpstart, and mandatory housing affordability fees in lieu of performance. And all 3 of those funding sources can be used for home ownership, development, and opportunity creation. So where are we in the planning process of these documents? We have gone out to y'all, and you have given us feedback and input. We started with identification of issues within OH staff and between stakeholders, getting your sort of constant feedback. Our doors are always open, and worked through the last year to where we are now. And at the last slide, I will just put a finer point on this, but next Wednesday, there is a committee hearing of the Housing and Human Services Committee of the Seattle City Council, 9:30 in the morning. And they haven't yet posted their agenda, but I will drop a link in the chat when I'm done sharing screen here that you can request a copy of that agenda when it is posted, and they will have then also published the final draft of these policies for comment at that committee meeting. So high level, quickly, some of the changes that were made to these policy documents. We have consolidated the type of short-term lending that we do. We used to have sort of a bridge loan fund and an acquisition loan fund, and it was confusing both for users and administrators. We have consolidated this now into just a short-term loan program and created these various caps. We are able to spend some funds in pre-development for publicly owned sites, sites that we put out for requests for proposals. This is both on the rental and the home ownership side. And then just more specific reporting dates, community workforce agreements on the rental side, and some other details insofar as it relates to our permanent supportive housing workforce stabilization and resident services on the permanent supportive housing side of the house. So there's sort of 4 buckets in which these updates fall into. And I'm going to focus for the purposes of this conversation on the green circle, advancing racial equity, where most of the homeownership changes fall. And you feel free, of course, to ask me questions about the other buckets, and I will probably direct you to someone else. But let's focus on the homeownership piece and advancing racial equity through all of our housing programs. But we got a little bit more specific about serving communities historically excluded from equitable access, looking at a more geographically dispersed sort of investment strategy, and then increasing the range of housing options more broadly, including investment in family-sized housing. And for the rental side, that means 2 bedrooms or more. And I'm going to get to what that means on the homeownership side. We don't actually use that term much on the homeownership side, family-sized housing, but specifically updates that affect the homeownership investments. There is a change now, and this has been revised since you all have seen the draft. Staff proposed that there be no first-time homebuyer requirement any longer for use of OH funding. There was some pushback on that, and sort of a middle ground was reached, wherein there is an exception to the first-time homebuyer rule for folks who either currently own or have owned resale restricted homes. So creating some mobility within that supplemental market that we're developing of resale restricted permanently affordable homes. And then there's just some other adjustments to the funding amounts. So currently our per cap subsidy for resale restricted permanently affordable home development is $100,000 for homes with 2 bedrooms and fewer, and $130,000 for 3 bedrooms and more. And we've gotten more granular, and this was per stakeholder advice. And so we hope that y'all are pleased with these numbers. We are hopeful that our proposal will be adopted, along with an increase for purchase assistance and home repair grants. Currently, down payment assistance is capped at $55,000 per household, and home repair grants are capped at 10. So these are fairly significant, we hope meaningful and useful increases to our funding. So again, where we are now It is the whatevereth, a sunny 7th of June, next Wednesday, Housing and Human Services Committee, 9:30. There will be a hearing on both the ANF plan and our housing funding policies. And I will stop sharing in some way. Ooh, yep. And drop those links in the chat. Questions? Answers, complaints, jokes, anything?
I have it, Erika. Can you give us an idea of how you see the reception of this set of suggestions to the council? Well, I guess not the full council yet, but in the committee.
I can speculate. My understanding from our council liaison is that the current chair of the Housing and Human Services Committee is very, very supportive of homeownership investments. So I am hopeful that the changes we have made will be passed out of committee and put to the full council.
And Kathleen, you have a question?
Yeah, Erika, did you want stakeholders to testify at the committee meeting or just the full council meeting? Or what would be best?
Let's see, what do I want? Well, it's not about what Erika wants, is it? I think it would be helpful for the committee to hear from stakeholders on Wednesday, especially if you support the proposed changes. And I think it would also be helpful for the full council to hear from stakeholders as well when they take it up in full council. Is that a fair enough answer?
Yeah.
And Ryan?
For what it's worth, I'm okay with whatever it is that Erika prefers. So you just tell us. But I just wanted to kind of specifically highlight, though, the the first-time homebuyer definition change and creating that loophole. I know, that's something that we certainly at Habitat support and are very glad to see that change happen, especially to be able to help create mobility and allow homeowners to be able to move up and down the continuum of housing and create new opportunities. So we're excited to see that's making the final version. So thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. And for what it's worth, it might be helpful to just share some of staff thinking about the removal of the first-time homebuyer requirement. I think that given the tumultuousness of the housing market over the last few years, and granted the requirement, of course, to be a first-time homebuyer is to have not owned a home in the last 3 years. But there are a number of opportunities where people have been displaced from Seattle and purchased homes in lower cost markets, lower valued markets maybe, and who could sell their home but not have enough money to buy a home back in Seattle. And that is under sort of the concept of right to return and allowing people to move back to their historic neighborhoods. I think it's a racial equity question, and I think it would be interesting and fair for council and the committee to hear that perspective, if indeed that is any one of your perspectives.
And one more question here. We have Talana.
No, I had a joke, but because I don't like dead silence, but I don't like dead. but everybody asks questions. I don't have to tell it.
Now you got the spotlight on you. You're gonna have to tell it.
It's really corny. It's really corny. Why was Cinderella such a horrible soccer player?
Why?
Because she was slow to the ball.
Nice.
All right, it's a sunny Friday now. We're set. All right. Well, thank you so much, Erika. Thank you for that, Delana. And thank you, Erika, for sharing with us this important information. That's a fast turnaround when we don't see the agenda out. We seem to be having a lot of that going on these days with Seattle City Council. I hope that's something that will be changing. It's a little exhausting to run the race. Patience?
Thank you, Bambi. And I thought, Taluna, that was a highlight for my week. Thanks for that. Erika, thank you for the work that you and OH have done. I hope folks understand how much work has gone into the stakeholder engagement, the drafting of the language, which is truly exceptional. The one thing I hope people will emphasize as they show up to testify is the support for the subsidy increase. That will go a long way in this market, and I think we need to reiterate the importance of the investments, and longer term that will feed into our advocacy in defending funding for affordable housing. So reiterating that for all of us as we show up next week, even if it's a short turnaround, you have the virtual option, please sign up and show up and be there to support the changes. Erika, the one question that I am going back to, and I don't recall this in the ordinance language, but did we have any data reporting requirement for homeownership? I know we have that for rental housing, but what's the data reporting requirement for homeownership, if any?
Yeah, great question. And I don't know what got actually passed in the ordinance. I can tell you as practice what we report, which is, all of the various spending amounts in each sort of category and the outcomes, both and the demographic, racial demographic, as well as income demographics. Yeah, I think it'll look the same as our reporting.
I think that's a good place to be. I mean, I know on the rental side, we're already hearing from providers how restrictive the process of being requested for some additional data inquiry is. And I know that came from some council members, and hopefully with this council, we don't get a layer of that. So something to keep an eye for.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Erika, and everyone else for their questions. We're going to move forward now with Jesse Simpson. We're going to talk about the Seattle Jumpstart spend plan. So again, these are all items in our homeownership policy framework. We're making sure that we're getting updated and seeing opportunities for advocacy. And I'll hand it over to Jesse.
Thanks, Bambi. Got some quick slides to run through. So the Jumpstart payroll expense tax is, in my view, one of the best things the city of Seattle has done in the past 5 years or so. It's a progressive payroll tax that passed in 2020, paid by companies paying employees more than $150,000 a year, targeting just those with large payrolls. Early estimates were that it would raise $214 million in year per year in revenue over the long term. And it's consistently exceeded that with $328 million raised this year. The spend plan for Jumpstart set aside, first off, the first couple of years of Jumpstart, it was agreed that it would be used to partially plug a general fund deficit as the city was feeling the impacts of COVID and having some federal funds run out, and it was a way to try and bridge that gap without cutting services, as well as increasing investments in housing. Vision for the long term is that you're dedicating it solely to affordable housing, small businesses, equitable development, Green New Deal. They set out these percentages: 62% for affordable housing, 9% for EDI, and 15% for small businesses, 9% for Green New Deal. And that we haven't quite adhered to that spend plan. It has become the foundational source for affordable housing and equitable development funding in the city of Seattle. That's going across both capital operations and across all parts of the affordable housing spectrum, from permanent supportive housing through affordable homeownership. Pulled this graph from the city of Seattle's budget report showing basically the increases in spending on affordable housing since 2019, the last 5 years. So Jumpstart is accounting for the largest plurality of funding for multifamily rental housing and for a significant portion of homeownership. Big part of why we've been able to scale up investments in affordable housing since 2019, with the other big part of this being the mandatory housing affordability program, which has levied through a inclusionary zoning, has levied fees on new development. There's also a substantial operations funding component that I can talk about, but it's really helped stabilize the workforce of permanent supportive housing by enabling providers like the Downtown Emergency Service Center, Plymouth Housing, to pay their workers a living wage, which has been really foundational for them in terms of retaining and attracting staff. Also want to point out nearly all of the ongoing funding for the Equitable Development Initiative is from Jumpstart. That's 20 million in 2024. Looking over the course of the levy, the Office of Housing has put together a bit of preliminary modeling about the kind of breakdown between Jumpstart and the levy. They use pretty conservative projections for Jumpstart or the payroll expense tax, assuming it would actually decline by 25% per year, 25% over the course of that. That was, again, just out of kind of conservativeness. Still, the main thing I'll highlight is that even with that assumption of actual decline in revenues, they're still showing roughly that Jumpstart will raise roughly as much for the range of affordable housing investments as the new $1 billion levy. Also, we'll call out the homeownership side, roughly equal amounts of investment. So 43 million for new homeowners projected to go into Jumpstart. It projected to go into homeownership development from Jumpstart. Results of these have been substantial. The city isn't tracking the Jumpstart investments quite as fastidiously as the housing levy investments. You kind of have to, they sort of allocate them against both the MHA and levy. So disentangling the attribution gets a little complicated. I think a fairly conservative accounting would be that you're looking at well over 2,000 affordable rental and homeownership homes that have been or will be produced over just 2 years of Jumpstart investments, along with a substantial investment in wage stabilization for services in permanent supportive housing. So all this is great, right? Oh, and then calling out specific homeownership investments as well. There's 12 million in the 2022 through 2023. This is that breakdown of the 109 homeownership options created by the payroll expense tax. Yeah, so all this is great, but yeah, we've got a huge budget deficit coming up, and the kind of long-term status of Jumpstart is definitely up in the air. City of Seattle has a structural budget deficit for the general fund. The Tim Eyman 1% cap on how much property taxes can increase per year is intersecting with an inflation rate that's well above 1%. That's driving a substantial long-term gap between the revenues and expenditures in the general fund. And this gap has existed over the past few years. It's kept growing, and it's been partially plugged by the payroll expense tax. If you recall from the beginning there, the PET is raising significantly more than was originally projected, at least under those conservative original projections. And the agreement hashed out between Council Member Teresa Mosqueda and Mayor Harrell and their team, along with Advocate Voices, was that you could, on a temporary basis, use that excess revenue raised above the original projections and use it to plug the general fund budget deficit gap. There was also a, let's create then a progressive revenue task force to stand up a more long-term revenue source to plug this gap. Patients could tell you more about how that process actually went. From a slightly more outside observation angle, I'd say it was not quite able to reach a consensus on we should do this particular revenue. They did release a report laying out some of the clear options for increased revenue that's progressive at the city level. Really, there's only a handful that rise to the scale that would plug the city's budget gap. First off being changing the dials of Jumpstart, increasing the rate, decreasing the exemptions, something in there to essentially raise additional 100 million or so. The other options are a little more untested. They could potentially do a capital gains tax at a city level. That's one option that looks as though it could raise a significant amount. And there's a notion of potentially a CEO tax that is maybe a quasi-payroll tax. None of the options besides the Jumpstart, changing the Jumpstart dials, look like they could be implemented in time for this budget. And then there's a few smaller options that around like a congestion charge or some other stuff, but they don't really get to the scale needed to plug the gap. So we need everyone to be engaged. I was really heartened by the outpouring of community support for the Equitable Development Initiative during last week's and then this week's public hearings, in which there was the amendment to potentially freeze some investments in EDI. I think that kind of mobilization is what we need to make sure we're protecting as much of the Jumpstart revenue for the Jumpstart spend plan for the affordable housing Equitable Development Initiative investments as is possible. I think it's, you know, we'll have to hash out exactly how much gets transferred to general fund. I think it's unlikely that we are able to keep everything in Jumpstart going to the spend plan, but as much as possible, because it really is the foundational source for, it's become the foundational source for affordable housing and equitable development funding in the city of Seattle. Budget process has kind of already started with on the mayor's team side. The mayor's proposed budget will be released in September, but they are working on it actively over the summer. So outreach is, I would say, already appropriate in terms of the outreach to mayor's office and city council. The formal process, though, is going to start at the end of September with the release of the mayor's proposed budget. This sets kind of a baseline for city council to consider as they change dials up and down. And so it's given the political dynamics, making sure that proposed budget is as good as possible for Jumpstart investments is important. The council itself will then own a lot more of this process. They'll have budget committee hearings, basically, October through November, with a final vote coming in late November, typically the week after Thanksgiving. And yeah, and we need advocates, both during these more formal touch points, opportunities to make your voice heard, as well as in conversations with direct decision makers before this formal process kicks off. That's about all I have. Any questions, comments? I'm gonna check the chat. Any reflections on Jumpstart?
So Jesse, you're pointing to kind of a more formal process happening in the fall. But we'll be looking at advocacy opportunities to send out in the next month and summer months as well. The EDI scenario has only had one positive effect, which is that the community members have been able to find one another and lean in on trying to create change. And being able to make this connective tissue that EDI funding is also directly related to what's going to happen with Jumpstart is a big point for people to understand. Can you talk a little bit about how clear it is that those are connected for people, or how council is clear or unclear on the connection at this point?
Yeah, the connection is almost one-to-one, honestly, because there aren't really any other ongoing sources for EDI beyond Jumpstart. Probably a few random transfers. We've tried to make that clearer. That connection, did that in my public testimony this past Tuesday, and the press conference. There was a press conference held Tuesday morning before the hearing with members of the coalition we're engaging with on Jumpstart and HDC members like El Centro de la Raza. And they were emphasizing the connection between Jumpstart and EDI. I think beating that drum more and more is important. Planning on releasing a action alerts to build on the energy behind EDI, protecting EDI, and to get people sending proactive messages, detached from this particular carry forward budget amendment, but just to emphasize a lot of people care about EDI funding, affordable housing funding, and are recognizing that Jumpstart is critical to those initiatives.
Right. Any other questions coming up for anyone? Point of clarification about kind of next steps. The way that I see it is that you'll here in the digest, when we have an advocacy opportunity, something that we might put together so that you have some language, some talking points to initiate. But at this point, as you lean in with your own council member for where you are, or other council members, or the mayor's office, these are all kind of a together deal. As you're talking about what happens with Jumpstart, you are talking about what happens with EDI. You are talking about what happens with homeownership funding and availability. So just going to try to make sure that we're sharpening that point for you and providing you with some avenues for advocacy. But if you happen to be having engagement with any of these particular electeds, letting them know that you see the importance of this funding is going to be a really great first step. And it looks like Ryan has put in the chat here, there's an active campaign. I'm assuming that is like a letter campaign, Ryan?
Yeah, we have an active campaign that we've gone for a little while of promoting the importance of continuing to fund affordable housing as the council looks at that. And I'll say that is, I think, an ongoing conversation that we're having as well with individual city council members, and kind of continuing to encourage affordable housing funding and affordable homeownership funding in particular, and making sure that you know, that they are continuing to fund and protect those dollars.
All right, well, there we go. So we already have a pathway here if you'd like to take that, and we'll be sure to make sure that we have that in the digest for next week. But again, remember, we have a really new council, and so this is a great time to be able to get to know the council members and to help inform them about what your priorities are as they start to figure out what their priorities are. So thanks to Jesse for giving us that update, and he will continue to keep us updated as we move through the spring, well, the last of the spring and summer. And then, of course, in the fall, we'll see a lot of that active scenario, but we want to lean in early. We don't want to be in the scenario of the decisions have already been made and we're just going through the formal process in the fall. We want to be in the influencing position before people really make a decision. So thanks to Jesse. And then we have a second Jesse today. You know, it doesn't happen very often, but Jesse Johnson is here, the Outreach and Community Engagement Director from the Washington State Treasurer's Office. Jesse, I went ahead and made sure that you are co-host so you can say, do what you need to do with your slides. And Jesse's going to talk to us today about the Washington Future Fund, which again, we're going through our homeownership policy framework. We're touching base on all of our items. This is a state level item. So we're thinking 2025, we're moving into the future. And on to you, Jesse.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me this Friday afternoon. And hopefully you all get to get out of this meeting and enjoy the sunshine we have. I will first kind of just reintroduce myself. Jesse Johnson, Director of Community Engagement and Outreach for the State Treasurer's Office. I've now been in the position a year and a half. Previously was in the state legislature for 3 sessions. And, I'm very much excited to present our Washington Future Fund proposal. I think we may have touched base on this proposal in 2022. And so now kind of coming back because obviously some work has happened. We're still moving the needle forward on the policy. So I'll go ahead and share my screen with the presentation materials. So let me know once it's up there. We go to the first slide. Okay, so kind of just a reminder. So this bill obviously is modeled after the baby bonds proposal. And so we are really in our office trying to combat the generational wealth inequities that exist. Obviously, a key indicator of that, of generational wealth, is whether or not you own homes. And so we feel like one of the best wealth building tools is to own a home. And so that's why I'm talking with you today. Our program for Washington Future Fund would provide $4,000 in an endowment or trust per child born into our Apple Health or Medicaid system, which now has reached 50% mark for the first time in history. So we are now at 1 in 2 births in Washington State are Apple Health funded births. And so which means they're below the poverty line. And so that might come at some surprise considering the amount of wealth we have in our state, but that just is, an indicator of the difference between those that have wealth and those that don't. So it would provide $4,000 for 40,000 babies per year, approximately. And then that money would be invested for 18 years until that young person is 18 years old. And they have between 18 years old and 35 years old to utilize the funds. Obviously, the longer you leave it in, the more money it generates. But right now, with our 7% return, it looks like we would have about $25,000 per child at 18 years old, and then moving up from there to utilize for 3 wealth building tools. One, obviously, is for down payment on property. The second of which is to start a small business in our state, and the third is to use for higher education, including trades and apprenticeships, and also including outside of tuition, so everyday expenses for the higher education that they're utilizing it for. So we are really excited about the opportunity to provide the seed capital that can be invested and appreciated for young people. Connecticut is the first state in the country to pass this policy. We would be hopefully the second state. I know California and us are kind of neck and neck in how far along we are on this, but in Connecticut, who I actually just met with their community engagement person the other day, they are now on their second cohort of babies, and they're talking about how this is impacting families' lives, not only in the future, but right now, and how they're having more confidence in their young people and their family, and having more confidence in their financial well-being to provide for those young people. And so they're already seeing really cool indicators of that in Connecticut. And so I'll talk a little bit about what they're going to be doing for us later this summer with our Future Fund relaunch event in August. So moving along, again, in 2020, so this is the latest data that we have from Prosperity Now. The median net worth of white households in Washington was $205,455 per year. Obviously, for families of color at $29,888, there's a huge racial wealth gap that we had, and income gap as well. And then when you look at, kind of broken down by county, as you can see in Spokane County, some of the biggest differences, as well as shortly thereafter, King and Pierce and Clark County, as well as Snohomish County. And one of the biggest things I think for Future Fund that we really feel like the housing piece of this is so important is with the new initiatives to build more homes, we just don't want the same corporations and landlords owning those homes. We want new folks in our state to be able to own those homes. And we have to do it in a long-term approach is the only way that we really see we can do that. And so that's why we're trying to have a policy with time on our side where, you can invest $150 million to launch this program, $300 million per biennium. But again, that's for 40,000 babies a year that would get this endowment or trust account of $4,000 that would then appreciate with time on our side up to $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 to be able to utilize for a down payment on a home. So kind of going back to 2016, just 1/4 of urban households experienced liquid asset poverty compared to 1/3 of rural households. So even in the rural spaces, this is really important, thinking about Yakima, Wenatchee, the Tri-Cities, where there's even a deeper gap between those that have and those that don't. And in those areas, it is actually about 65 to 70% of births on Apple Health. So the more rural you get, the more deeper the divide you see. And then also wealth is disproportionately concentrated within urban centers throughout Western Washington. And a lot of those parts of the rural spaces in our state are left behind. So you're seeing, the need for an injection of capital into those places, which is why, this money would have to be utilized in Washington state to either, buy a home, start a business, or finance your education. So again, just talking about where, the most births on Apple Health are in our state, you can see the darker the blue, the more poverty. And so you see Yakima and Grant and Okanagan, Pacific, Ferry counties. And then even though King and Pierce and those are less than 50%, they're still between the 40 to 50% range of births on Apple Health. So the more rural, again, the more deeper the divide and the more poverty. But still, when you compare it to the rest of the nation, like Connecticut, for example, they have about 1/10 of the amount of births on their version of Apple Health as we do. So Washington State, again, is in a higher margin of those that are below the poverty line. So coming back to the reason we're here, home ownership, we really, really feel like Future Fund has a big part of that. And so these dollars would reduce those capital barriers. And again, if folks are thinking about, well, how would this actually work? How would it be implemented? So when that young person is 18 years old, from the moment they're 14, actually, when they start high school, they're going to be getting notifications that, hey, you're Future Fund eligible. And so for those 4 years, them and their family are going to be getting a lot of notification that once you're 18, this is what you can do. You can obviously wait longer, but this is what you can do with those funds. And then once they decide how to utilize those funds, we have a Future Fund committee that would work on getting those funds directed to whatever institution that they want them to be directed to. So the person will not actually ever see this check in hand. If they say, okay, I want a home loan from BECU and I want it to be for 15 of my $25,000, they can do that. I want to save the rest, the other $10,000 to go to college, they can do that. And so it'd be given to the institution of their choice from the Future Fund committee. So that's how it would work. Again, this was our advisory committee that worked on this bill. Obviously, our two prime sponsors, Representative Monica Stonier in Vancouver, Senator Yasmin Trudeau in Tacoma. This will be their #1 priority bills going into the legislative session for them both. And so we're really excited about that. Others that worked on this bill with us was Tracy from the State Budget and Policy Center, Tanita Webb, the first African-American CEO of a credit union in our state, Ephraim Fasaha, who is the owner of Boon Boona Coffee, also who I'm partial to because I graduated from UW with him. An amazing guy. He was the Puget Sound Business Journal Businessman of the Year. Edgar Franks, who is a labor political director for Familias Unidas por la Justicia in Yakima and Mount Vernon. And then Jennifer Bereskin from the Snohomish Nation, as well as Jen Black from WEA. And we also have a number of coalition partners here that support the bill, that have been writing letters, doing op-eds to legislators. And then just a few of the showing that it's a statewide approach of the different newspapers across the state that support the feature fund. So getting to the event, because we're going to have a number of new legislators, obviously there's like 31 different seats that'll be new people this year. We want to relaunch this bill with a really big event this August. So we are having a Future Fund in Action event in August, on Thursday, August 15th from 10 to 2:30 at the WEA building. I have the flyer on the screen. If you would like or interested, I'll make sure that this entire group gets the flyer where you can RSVP via your phone right there on the screen if you want, or you can wait till you get the flyer and RSVP. But we're actually bringing out Dr. Derek Hamilton, who created this concept of baby bonds from the New School of Race, Power, and Political Economy in New York, to come out and speak on behalf of why this bill is so important. I was in New York with him 2 months ago, working on a number of things, but Future Fund being one of them, and some of the national support for it. There's federal legislation for baby bonds from Representative Cory Booker and or Senator Cory Booker and Representative Ayanna Pressley, but we don't think the federal legislation will have much movement for a long time, which is why the state-by-state approach is where they're putting the most support. In the federal legislation, there's a number of barriers, as you know, probably the same with a lot of different policies, but we want to make sure that state by state we have this. And then if the federal passes someday, that's more money for babies and for young people. So we're excited about that. We're also having the Assistant Treasurer and Chief of Staff in Connecticut, Andrea Comer, come out. She just did a big event in Oakland and talked about how, again, the mindsets of young people going into high school are changing because they have this in place. And so it's super important that we highlight that. Senator Trudeau, Rep. Stonier, Ephraim, Edgar, and Tanita from our committee will be speaking. And I'll also be leading a Youth Voices panel with justice-involved youth, youth in the foster care system, and also young people from our tribal institutions to talk about why this is so important. So we're really excited for this event. I'll make sure that you get the flyer so you can RSVP. Again, Thursday, August 15th from 10 to 2:30 at the WEA building in Federal Way. And with that, I will stop sharing. I can actually leave this other one if folks want to RSVP now up, and happy to answer any questions.
Patience.
Thank you. And Jesse, thank you for all the work you are doing to keep this vision alive and to the finish line. The one question I want to zero in on is with the bill. What is the revenue source for the bill? How different is that work from the wealth tax effort? And I ask that because we see the wealth tax as a critical revenue source that would bring significant resources. And we want to be able to collaborate with key partners. And we're talking very early on now with the champion to try and pull together a strategy. So if you could talk us through just the difference in the revenue sources, or if you are looking at the wealth tax as that revenue source, and how can we collaborate?
Great question, Patience, and thank you for all your work. I attended the HDC Consortium luncheon, and just really proud of all the work that you have done and just the tireless efforts that this group has put into that work. So on behalf of our office, thank you for all your work. So I'll kind of just give a little bit of background. So to this point, obviously there's been progressive revenue bills on the table. The treasurer has been hesitant to publicly endorse any of those bills. One of the reasons, though, probably the biggest reason, was we were seeing really low returns, 2 and 3%, which meant that for the future fund bill, by the time that the young people were 18, it was looking like it was going to be $10,000 to $15,000 coming back, which really doesn't put a dent into the wealth and equities that we wanted. And so we were in support of a constitutional amendment that would say the state investment board can now invest these dollars more progressively, because right now it's very conservative how they invest the dollars. And so we wanted to change the Constitution, not only for future fund, but for any poverty reduction bills, to be able to have a state investment board that would progressively invest. In order to do a state constitution, you have to have a 2/3 vote, which meant we would have to have a good amount of Republicans supporting the future fund bill and the constitutional amendment in the legislature to pass. And obviously, whenever you bring up progressive revenue, every Republican turns up their nose. And so we were on the fence because we needed Republican support to have the change to our state constitution. Now that it is since 2021, when we first introduced this bill, the returns look a little better. Again, around 7% returns, which is about $25,000 that would be available when they're 18. That looks a lot better to us. And so we've been having discussions as a team as to making sure that the state treasurer comes out and supports really boldly things like progressive revenue. We've had some discussions and some, I guess you would call it like policy discussions around wealth tax, around estate tax, and some of the other options on the table. And so we're in the middle of kind of deciding where we really want to specifically come out in support of, which ones we want to come out in support of. I know I actually just got off the phone with Senator Frame yesterday. Her and Mike had a really good conversation, it sounds like. And so I think we're moving in that direction where we could potentially support something like that without the need of having Republican support, again, for a constitutional amendment, but just for a future fund. So I think that's kind of where we're at. We're really excited about that. I know personally, I'm trying to push us in that direction. So we'll see where the treasurer lands, but that's the direction it looks like we're going.
Amazing. Thank you.
I think Ryan might still has his hand up, or he had a question.
It's less of a question, more of backing you up on the joy that is Ephraim and Boon Boona, and strongly encouraging everyone to go visit one of their locations if you haven't yet, especially right here in beautiful downtown Renton.
Yes, yeah. Renton's great. There's the one I think on Cherry Hill. He's actually now the coffee producer for the University of Washington. So they have a cafe in the UW bookstore on the Ave, which that's really cool to see that happening. So yeah, definitely support that. And Ephraim, again, was a key part of our bill. He spent a year with us working on this bill because of his story, graduating from UW and then coming out in 2011 and literally getting rejected from every single credit union, bank, CDFI for a loan. He then moved to Atlanta, was selling coffee out of the back of his car, and had to come back home and really fight for every cent to be able to pull Boon Boona together and open it in 2017 or 2018, I believe. And so he was saying he literally could have did that in 2011 when he graduated if something like this would have been in place. And so that's why it's so important that we have something like Future Fund, because it jumpstarts these creative and innovative ideas that our young people have from the get-go without having to wait decades to get things started and off the ground.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Jesse. And are there any other questions or comments? It sounds like it's going to be a great afternoon and morning on Thursday, August 15th. And, Dr. Derek Hamilton is at the New School in New York City and is often kind of cited as the architect of baby bonds. So you'll be hearing from the source at that moment. It'll be an excellent discussion.
And maybe a taco truck there for one of my taco truck guys might be able to show up and provide food. So that's also exciting.
Always need to watch our blood sugars, so we're good.
Sure.
We're anything else coming up for anyone that we can ask of Jesse and the Treasurer's Department at this moment? All right. Well, thank you so much for that presentation and for keeping us updated. You are on our homeownership policy framework. You will continue to be so, and we're looking to have some exciting talks and updates and innovations around the wealth tax and what's moving forward with progressive revenue for 2025. So definitely it is out there on the radar, and you will all be hearing more as we move through.
Sorry, literally at the last second, I thought of something. Is it possible to share that presentation you had, Jesse? I think that was super informative, and I'd like to sort of come back to it.
Yeah, I'll make sure Bambi gets the presentation and the flyer.
Yeah, we'll be able to have the video recording for this meeting as well as all of the PowerPoints that you were able to see today. So that will all come to everyone who is in the meeting today and those who couldn't make it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. We're towards the end of the agenda here, and what I've done is I've left a kind of 10-minute open spot for some open floor community news. So if there is anyone who has something that they would like to bring up, an exciting event that we all should know about, current work that they're moving, partnership that they're hoping for, this would be your moment to go ahead and step on in and provide your news. Anne?
Hey everyone, Ann Campbell, Managing Director for the Homeownership Unit at Commerce. I just want to say thank you so much for the amazing presentations. It's really exciting to hear what all is going on. I wanted to just say update on the community, the Covenant Homeownership program. The very first deposit of funds to the Housing Finance Commission was transferred over earlier this week. The funds are short of the forecasted at the time that the bill was originally passed. We only were able to transfer over $18.5 million, but that's still nothing to sneeze at. And that is because overall real estate transactions have declined and the money was only started collecting in January. So I will be keeping, of course, the committee updated on things as we move forward, but I wanted to let everybody know that the first amount of money has been transferred over. And I also wanted to share, in case y'all missed it at the Affordable Housing Advisory Board meeting, that I was flabbergasted because we've been really busy and we haven't taken time to celebrate, but I wanted to just share the news that in just the first year of the biennium, with the money that was invested in the Housing Trust Fund for Homeownership across direct appropriations and competitive awards, and we haven't finished investing all of it yet. We still have the fall and we still have more money to be invested with some of the direct appropriations as homes are being acquired. We have already, just in the first year of this biennium, created more than 1,100 new first-time home buyers in our state. And that is a record breaker for history for the state when it comes to homeownership. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone in this meeting, because without your support and without your advocacy, we wouldn't be where we are today. And we at Commerce really appreciate that and are using it to leverage and to advocate for more investment, more resources, more flexibility on how we do create new homeowners. And that was part of our decision package that got forwarded to the director's office earlier this week. So I just wanted to share that good news. So thank you, everyone.
It's almost like we were right about the need.
Excellent. Well, it's excellent news, and it also bodes well for continuing to meet the need, right? So I am so excited to hear these announcements. Anything else anyone wants to share before we head out into our sunny Friday?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're rolling a lot of the pre-launch items for the Covenant Homeownership Assistance Program. And if y'all want to see what the published program manual looks like, I will go ahead and share that in the chat box for everyone. And we're going to have a number of training for lenders as well as nonprofits that'll be coming up. We posted trainings for the mortgage lenders, which we'll be doing in the last 2 weeks of June. And a lot of information to roll out, a lot of questions that we're probably going to be answering again and again, just to get everybody grooved in on the program. A lot of it, I'm sure, is going to revolve around the documentation. And that is a area where we have our marching orders from the legislature. And we've interpreted them as best we can, but we're going to see what it really looks like when the rubber hits the road of people documenting their impacted status in that program. So link is in the chat. Feel free to share. It's out in the open now.
Thank you for that, Dietrich. And, you know, it's going to be an amazing summer. This is going to be a groundbreaking exercise, and we're all going to be right front and center on that. July 1 will be the first disbursements to award for DPA. So definitely get your community members excited about the work. And we'll have Patience just finish us up here as we head out.
Great, thank you, Bambi. And here, Dietrich, that is amazing news to hear, and we're just looking forward to the program being launched. Another plug for HDC members, we have the Public Funders Panel next week. So we're looking forward to seeing most of you on the call. It's a virtual member meeting. We have all the public funders lined up to talk about funding opportunities and the next rounds of NOFAs. So bring your questions and come ready for an in-depth conversation. And with that, Bambi, I'll let you close us off.
You bet. Well, I wish you all the most amazing weekend of absorbing some sun energy. We need it. We need it. We need it. I hear we are going to be above 75 today and even warmer tomorrow, but today is your sunshine day. So thank you so much for showing up and sitting with us today. You will receive, again, the PowerPoints as well as emails for the participants and the presenters so that you can reach out to them. And you'll also have the video coming. So we'll see that next week. I will probably be sending an action alert also as we consider that council meeting on Wednesday so that people can lean in on that great work happening through the levy. Feeling like a really good sunshiny day. And this has been a lot of great information. So thank you so much for leaning in and looking forward to seeing you in July. Have a great afternoon.